The year was 1741, and Great Britain and Spain were at war. In May 1741, the British warship HMS Wager set sail as part of Commodore George Anson's squadron, whose mission was to harass and disturb the Spaniards in the southern seas. However, fate had a different ordeal in store for the ship and its crew. After several months at sea, HMS Wager became separated from the squadron during a storm near Cape Horn and was wrecked on the inhospitable shores of Patagonia. More than 150 crew members found themselves cast ashore on the rocky coast, without provisions or any means of subsistence in this harsh land. Under the ominous light of the full moon, HMS Wager cut through the raging waters of the Strait of Magellan. Fierce winds howled like packs of demons, throwing huge waves onto the deck. But this was no ordinary May night. There was an ominous premonition in the air. Suddenly the ship shuddered, striking the rocks. Captain Charles Raymond desperately tried to steer the vessel into deep water, but it was too late. The Wager was stuck on the reef, surrounded by thunderous waves. As the hull smashed against the stones, it seemed as if the island itself was emitting inhuman screams. The crew panicked, scrambling to save their lives. Captain Charles Raymond ordered them to land, and they established a camp on a sinister patch of land. In the following days, strange events began to haunt the survivors. At night, eerie screams and moans were heard, which could not be attributed to any earthly creature. The sailors swore they saw pale figures gliding between the rocks. Soon, quarrels and disputes began in the camp due to a lack of supplies. But the worst was ahead. One night, heart-wrenching screams of horror were heard, and several sailors disappeared without a trace. All that remained were signs of struggle on the coastal sand. The survivors fell into madness from fear. They were convinced that the island was cursed, possessed by evil supernatural forces thirsting for their souls. Some sailors went mad, wandering the shore and muttering terrifying incantations. Many sailors fell ill with scurvy. Soon some of the sick began to die. The ship's captain, Charles Raymond, also died, and he had to be replaced by his deputy, David Cheap. Captain David Cheap, wounded in the wreck, struggled to maintain control over the crew. Many sailors had been forcibly conscripted into the fleet, and now, finding themselves in a desperate situation, they mutinied. They decided to seize the boats and try to reach populated areas on their own. Captain Cheap and the officers loyal to him tried to stop the mutineers, but to no avail. The mutineers captured the boats and headed north along the Chilean coast. However, new hardships and deprivations awaited them. Storms, hunger and thirst plagued them at every turn. Most of them perished on the way, and only a few managed to reach Spanish settlements, where imprisonment awaited them. John Bulkley and John Cummins were in despair. Together with other survivors, they fled the cursed island on a captured boat, leaving behind their insane comrades. But their nightmare was far from over. The first days of their journey were excruciating. The scorching sun, scant supplies of water and provisions. But the worst was yet to come. At night, ominous whispers and moans seemed to follow them. "The spirits of the island, they won't let us go," one of the sailors cried out in terror. One night, as the boat drifted in the ominous silence, something huge and dark sliced through the water next to them. The sailors screamed in horror as a giant shadow surrounded their vessel. "It's the vengeful spirit of the island. He's come to take our souls," howled one of the madmen, cursing in an unfamiliar language. The next day, 2 sailors disappeared without a trace. All that was left was splattered blood on the bottom of the boat. The rest were paralyzed with fear, not daring to even speak of what had happened. Days merged into a nightmarish stream of hunger, thirst, and madness. One by one, the sailors went mad or died. By the time the boat reached the shores of Chile, only a few people were left alive, including Bulkeley and Cummins. Exhausted, driven mad by the horrors they had experienced, the survivors were arrested by the Spaniards. John Bulkeley played a key role in planning the Wager mutiny. He could not have carried it out alone. They secretly planned to raise a mutiny against Cheap, even recording their plans and the reasons for their uprising. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the Wager crew on shore faced even more terrifying trials. Among them were the severely wounded and dying, who required immediate care. They were forced to subsist on shellfish and seaweed, suffering from scurvy and the cold of the Patagonian winter. A few individuals made a desperate attempt to cross Patagonia and reach the Spanish territories on the other coast of South America. But their tracks soon vanished in the vast expanses, and nothing was known of their fate. Of the nearly 250 people aboard the Wager, only 36 survived. The rest perished from wounds, hunger, diseases, or fell victim to the elements and hostile natives. The survivors moved around the island in groups, searching for food and shelter. After 2 weeks, having reached their goal on the other side of the island, they stumbled upon edible fruits, which allowed them to hold on and not die of hunger while waiting for help. But as it turned out, their nightmare was far from over. Lieutenant Benjamin Starr clung to the trunk of a tree, his heart pounding so hard it seemed about to leap from his chest. Around him in the night forest, ominous sounds echoed, screams, howls, and the beat of drums. Just a few days ago, there were nearly 150 of them, survivors after the shipwreck of the Wager off the coast of Patagonia. But their journey in search of safety turned into a nightmare when they encountered a tribe of fierce native cannibals. First, the stragglers who fell behind the group disappeared. Then entire patrols did not return from reconnaissance. Starr saw signs of struggle and blood, but no other traces. Then the nightly nightmares began. Piercing screams and cries tore through the silence, chilling the blood in their veins. Sometimes they found scattered human bones and skulls gnawed to a shine. "They're eating us!" one of the sailors screamed. Lieutenant Starr tried to maintain order, but terror seized his people. Last night, everything reached a climax. The cannibal tribe descended on their camp like a wild horde. Starr watched as his comrades fell one by one under the blows of clubs, spears, and arrows. The air was filled with screams of agony. Those who survived were captured and bound. One by one, his people fell, their bodies brutally disfigured. When it was all over, the natives gathered their bloody harvest, severed heads and scalps as trophies. Bulkley watched in horror as the natives began their bloody feast. Only a handful managed to flee into the night, including Lieutenant Benjamin Starr. He ran blindly, pursued by ominous howls and the beat of drums. Sounds he would never forget. Finally, he collapsed from exhaustion, his mind barely clinging to reality. Starr knew he had to warn the world about the atrocities of these wild cannibals. For if they are not stopped, their bloody feast may spread further. At night, Starr still heard the ominous drums and cries, and before his eyes stood the images of the disfigured bodies of his people. Soon, on the other end of the island, two groups united into one under the leadership of Captain Cheap. The group of Lieutenant Benjamin Starr and Captain David Cheap. The survivors clung to life, hoping for a miracle. And it happened. Several months later, when another British ship passed by. Among the survivors was John Byron, the grandfather of the poet Lord Byron. John Byron was a midshipman on the ship Wager when the ship was wrecked, and he was one of the few survivors and a witness to all the horrors. The thrilling story of the ship Wager became a public sensation in its time. The first written account by the Honourable John Byron played no small part in this. His grandson Lord Byron would later surpass his ancestor in literary fame. Byron detailed the mutiny of part of the crew and their attempt to escape on the boats. He also condemned the mutineers, calling them cowards and traitors who abandoned their wounded comrades to fate. They returned to England, telling the world about the horrors and sufferings that had befallen them. Many were surprised that any of them had survived. Their stories shook society and caused a wide public outcry. The Wager tragedy vividly demonstrated the dangers and challenges faced by sailors of that time in uncharted waters, far from their native shores. It also exposed problems related to the staffing of military ship crews, many of whom were recruited from among criminals and outcasts. This forced the Admiralty to reconsider approaches to ensuring the safety and training of military ship crews for long voyages. At the end of 2006, an expedition of the Scientific Society of Explorers, SES, searched for the wreckage of the Wager and found a 5-by-5-meter piece of wooden hull with some frames and outer planking in the shallow water at the northwestern corner of Wager Island. Today, the story of the wreck of HMS Wager serves as a reminder of the courage and resilience of sailors of the past, of their readiness to risk their lives in the performance of duty. It teaches us that even in the most hopeless situations, one must not lose hope and humanity, for only unity and mutual assistance helped the few surviving crew members to survive this terrible tragedy. The last entries of Captain Cheap. In his tattered diary, rescuers found terrifying records of the crew's misfortunes after the shipwreck. Their stories vividly describe the incredible resilience of man and the depths to which people can sink in a state of despair. Cheap's records became a grim reminder of how quickly a civilized person can descend into primitive barbarism when faced with extreme desperation.